Okay, let's dive right into this. Today, we are looking at an absolute masterclass in corporate resilience. We're unpacking the Q2 2026 earnings report for the telecommunications powerhouse, America Movil. Just take a second and look at that number. 241 billion Mexican pesos. That is the massive second quarter revenue figure America Mobile just dropped. But honestly, the real story here isn't just the sheer size of that number, it's the crazy environment they achieved it in. How exactly does a telecom giant manage to grow its revenue, add millions of subscribers, and actually expand its margins during a period of intense global economic pressure? Well, that is exactly what we're going to figure out today. Here's our roadmap for this explainer. First, global headwinds and highlights. 2, the subscriber boom. 3, consolidated financial snapshot. 4, Brazil leads the charge. 5, 5G fuels Colombia. And finally 6, developments in Mexico and Peru. Section 1, global headwinds and highlights. A tough environment. Let's be completely real. The second quarter of 2026 was wild. Throughout this period, the world was dealing with the global impacts of the raging Iran war. By mid-May, oil prices had spiked to roughly 70% higher than their pre-war levels. Naturally, this triggered some pretty intense global inflation concerns and pushed long-term interest rates way up. 30-year U.S. Treasury yields literally hit their highest point in nearly 20 years. But here's the fascinating part. Despite these massive global headwinds, Latin American currencies and the euro proved remarkably resilient, mostly holding their ground against the US dollar. And this specific context is exactly why America Mobil's numbers are such a vital case study for anyone navigating inflation. Moving to Section 2, the subscriber boom, the 3.5 million anchor. And this brilliantly illustrates their operational muscle. America Movil added a staggering 3.5 million postpaid subscribers in a single quarter. 3.5 million! Brazil is absolutely leading the pack by a mile here, pulling in 1.5 million of those additions all on its own. Then you've got Colombia with 250,000, Peru with 173,000, and Mexico with 101,000. Remember, an expanding postpaid base is a highly reliable, high-value revenue stream. It's the holy grail for telecoms. Now, before we get into the heavy financials, I just want to pause for a super quick methodology note. America Movil is now classifying fixed wireless access or FWA devices under mobile services rather than fixed line services. This is just to keep things consistent across all their operations, but it does slightly shift the baseline data for regions like Colombia and Central America. So just keep that in mind as we look at the segment growth. Section 3, Consolidated Financial Snapshot, digging into the billions. Let's distill the critical numbers from the balance sheet. Total revenue hit that 241 billion Mexican pesos mark, which is a very solid 3.1% year-over-year increase. But you really need to look at the bottom line. Net income jumped by a highly impressive 9.2% to over 24 billion pesos. On top of that, EBITDA, their core operational profitability, went up by 3.8%. And honestly, it's worth noting that if it weren't for a specific one-off or regulatory charge that we'll get to later, that EBITDA growth would have actually been 6.7%. This right here, this is the definition of robust financial health. Section 4, Brazil leads the charge, the growth engine. Operating as Claro in Brazil, they drove a 5.4% revenue growth, hitting 13.5 billion Brazilian reals. But even more impressively, their EBITDA increased by 5.1%. Now, why is that such a big deal? Because they pulled this off in a wildly competitive environment where everyone else is just throwing promotional discounts around. They are growing profitably, even when the rest of the market is in a pricing war. Now, what's really interesting about this dynamic is the contrast happening inside the Brazilian market. On one hand, you have this explosive mobile boom, those 1.5 million postpaid additions we mentioned fueling a 7.1% increase in postpaid revenue. But on the other hand, there's actually a slight contraction in fixed-line services. Even though they added 83,000 broadband accesses, they ended up with a net loss of 49,000 fixed-line subscriptions. So without a doubt, mobile is the absolute dominant growth vector here. Section 5, 5G fuels Colombia, quality over quantity. A truly massive number jumps right out from Colombia's financials, a 12.5% surge in EBITDA. How in the world did they do this? Honestly, by making a pretty ruthless strategic move. In what you could call the ultimate digital spring cleaning, they intentionally disconnected 2.5 million prepaid lines. By shedding these lower value, likely inactive accounts, they dramatically improved their operating leverage. Because of that move, their EBITDA margin climbed from 39.4% up to a stellar 41.9%. And listen, this wasn't just about cutting dead weight, it was heavily about pushing next-generation tech. The 5G catalyst in Colombia is very real. They've aggressively expanded their 5G rollout to 78 cities and towns. This tangible, real-world improvement in network quality directly fueled a 10.2% growth in postpaid revenue. That is their strongest performance in more than 7 years. Consequently, average revenue per user, or ARPU, increased by 6.6%. It just goes to show, better tech equals higher paying, happier customers. Section 6, Developments in Mexico and Peru, Fines and Fiber. First up, let's talk about Mexico. We're seeing a very healthy broad-based improvement in the mobile segment under Telcel. Mobile service revenue accelerated to 6.6% year-over-year, which is the strongest pace they've seen in several quarters. Both prepaid and postpaid revenues showed really robust growth. So the crucial point here is understanding the gap between Mexico's underlying strength and its reported reality. Under the surface, without extraordinary items, EBITDA would have grown by a very solid 4.3%. However, the reported reality shows EBITDA up only 0.6%. Why? This suppression was entirely due to a one-off regulatory fine imposed on Telmex. So it's basically a short-term hit that completely masks what was otherwise an exceptionally strong operational quarter in their home market. Finally, let's look at a major strategic play happening down in Peru. America Movil just announced an agreement to acquire 100% of WOW Peru. WOW operates this incredibly robust fiber broadband network with a significant presence outside the capital city of Lima. This is a huge deal because it perfectly complements Claro Peru's existing infrastructure. It strongly signals a long-term commitment to capturing the high-quality digital connectivity market across the entire country, not just in the main urban center. Which brings us to our final thought for today. We've just watched a telecom giant not just survive, but actively thrive. They're growing margins, expanding 5G, and scooping up new fiber networks, all while the global economy is wrestling with high inflation and serious geopolitical uncertainty. So, considering this aggressive postpaid growth and strategic expansion, how well is America Movil positioned to navigate the rest of a highly volatile 2026? It's definitely a question worth pondering as we look toward the next quarter. Thanks for joining me on this deep dive, and keep learning.